Michael Carter slammed his toolbox down on the polished hangar floor, and the sound cracked through the room like a gunshot. 20 engineers in tailored suits spun around. "You're all wrong," he said, his voice low and steady. "You've spent 6 days, and this jet still won't start because none of you are listening to it." A billionaire CEO had bet $1 million that no one could fix her $90 million jet. 200 experts had already failed. And now a single dad with grease under his fingernails was about to prove them all fools in 4 minutes. But here's the twist. The thing that finally started that jet wasn't in any manual. It was written by hand decades ago by a dying man who never got the credit he deserved. Stay with me all the way to the end of this story, because what Michael does with that $1 million will hit you right in the chest. And drop a comment below telling me what city you're watching from, so I can see just how far this story has traveled. If you love stories about the little guy proving the whole world wrong, subscribe and ride along with me. The first thing Michael Carter noticed that morning was that his coffee had gone cold, and he'd only been awake for 40 minutes. He didn't have time to microwave it. He never did. He stood at the kitchen counter of his small 2-bedroom house on the edge of town, drinking the cold coffee anyway, because throwing it out felt like throwing away money. And money was the one thing Michael Carter never had enough of. "Dad, my backpack strap is broken again." He turned. Lily stood in the doorway, 9 years old, holding up the frayed strap like evidence in a courtroom. Her hair wasn't brushed. It never was, not properly, because Michael had never quite figured out how to do a girl's hair the way her mother would have. "Let me see it," he said. She crossed the kitchen and handed it over. He knelt down, took the strap in his rough hands and studied it, the way he studied everything, like it was a machine that had simply forgotten how to work. "See this?" he said. The stitching didn't break. The plastic clip cracked. 2 different problems. Everybody thinks it's the strap, but it's the clip. "Dad, I just need it to hold my books." He almost smiled. "Right. Sorry." He dug into the kitchen drawer, the one that held everything: rubber bands, dead batteries, a single glove, and a small roll of steel wire. He threaded the wire through the broken clip, twisted it 3 times, folded the sharp end under so it wouldn't scratch her, and handed it back. "That'll hold better than the day you bought it." Lily slung it over her shoulder, tested the weight, and looked up at him with an expression he never got tired of, the look of a kid who genuinely believed her father could fix anything. "You're gonna be late," she said. "I'm always late. It's part of my charm." "That's not what Mrs. Alvarez says. She says you're chronically late." "Mrs. Alvarez talks too much." Lily grinned, grabbed her lunch off the counter, the lunch he'd packed at 11 the night before, a peanut butter sandwich and an apple, because that was what there was, and headed for the door. "Hey," Michael called after her, "what do machines do?" She stopped, rolled her eyes because she'd heard it 10,000 times, and answered anyway. "They tell the truth." "And what do you have to do?" "Learn how to listen." She pushed open the door. "I know, Dad. Grandpa said it 1,000,000 times before he died, and now you say it 1,000,000 times, so it's basically immortal." The door shut behind her. Michael stood alone in the kitchen for a moment, the cold coffee in his hand, and let himself feel the quiet. He didn't get much of it. He was 41 years old. He'd been raising Lily alone for 6 years, and there wasn't a single day in those 6 years when he hadn't worried about money. His shop, Carter Aviation Repair, was 3 miles away in a metal building he rented month to month from a landlord who reminded him every month that he could charge more if he wanted to. Michael fixed the things that other people threw away: navigation systems, avionics boards, old radios out of small private planes. He was good at it. He was better than good. But being the best mechanic in a town nobody had heard of didn't pay the bills, and lately the bills had been stacking up in a drawer he tried not to open. He rinsed the mug, grabbed his jacket, the faded gray work jacket with Carter stitched over the pocket in thread that had gone from white to dirty ivory, and walked out to his truck. The truck started on the second try. It always did lately. He'd been meaning to fix it himself, but the shoemaker's kids always go barefoot, and the mechanic's own truck was always the last thing on the list. The job that morning was a delivery, a repaired navigation unit packed carefully in foam inside a hard case on his passenger seat. He'd spent 2 nights on it tracing a fault through a circuit board that 3 other shops had given up on. The client was a big outfit on the other side of the county, Whitmore Aviation, and the money from this one job would cover rent, 2 weeks of groceries, and maybe, if he was careful, a new backpack for Lily, so she'd stop walking around with a strap held together by wire. He'd never been to the Whitmore hangar before. He'd only heard about it. Everybody in aviation had heard about it. Sophia Whitmore had built the company from almost nothing in less than a decade, and now it was one of the biggest private aviation companies in the country. The kind of place that had marble floors in the lobby of a building where they kept airplanes. Michael drove for 40 minutes with the radio off. He liked the quiet. He liked to think. And what he thought about mostly was his father. Thomas Carter had been dead for 2 years, and Michael still reached for the phone sometimes to call him. 35 years his father had spent with his hands inside aircraft, first in the Air Force, then civilian, then teaching at a trade program that got its funding cut the same year Thomas got sick. He never made much money. He never won any awards. When he died, the funeral home had 11 people in it, and 9 of them were relatives. But Thomas Carter had known machines the way a doctor knows a body. He didn't just fix them, he understood them. And before he died, he'd pressed one thing into Michael's hands, not money, not property, but an old spiral notebook, its cover soft as cloth from decades of handling filled front to back with his handwriting. Michael kept it in the glove compartment of his truck. He didn't need to read it anymore. He'd memorized most of it. But he kept it close the way some men keep a photograph. One line in that notebook had never left him. Before you replace the machine, understand why the machine is afraid to work. His father had underlined "afraid" twice. Michael used to argue with him about it back when he was young and thought he knew everything. Machines aren't afraid of anything, Dad. They're metal. They either work or they don't. And Thomas would smile that slow smile and say, "Everything's got a reason for what it does, son. Even the ones made of metal, especially those. People lie about their reasons. Machines never do." Michael was 41 now, and he understood at last exactly what the old man had meant. He just hadn't expected to prove it in front of 200 people that afternoon. He knew something was wrong before he even reached the gate. There were news vans. 3 of them parked along the road outside the Whitmore property, satellite dishes tilted up at the sky. A knot of reporters stood near the fence with cameras and coffee cups waiting for something. Michael slowed the truck. A security guard stepped out of a booth and held up a hand. "Deliveries around the side," the guard said. "I've got a nav unit for the maintenance department. They're expecting it." The guard looked at the truck, the dents the Carter on the door in peeling paint, and something in his face said he didn't think much of what he saw. But he checked a clipboard, found the name, and waved him through with the reluctance of a man following orders he didn't agree with. "Side entrance, hangar C, and don't wander." Michael drove through the gate and past a row of buildings that got nicer as he went until he reached the last and largest one, Hangar C. It was the size of a football stadium, and parked in front of it, half in and half out of the enormous open door, was the most beautiful aircraft Michael had ever seen in his life. He didn't know it yet, but its name was the Aurora. $90 million of engineering. Every curve of it designed by people who charged more for an hour of their time than Michael made in a month. And it wasn't running. He could tell from across the lot. Not because of anything he could see, the aircraft looked perfect, gleaming untouched. He could tell because of the people around it. There were dozens of them, and they had the look of men who had been beaten by a problem for so long they'd forgotten what it felt like to win. They stood in clusters. They argued in low voices. They stared at diagnostic screens like the screens had personally insulted them. Michael parked, pulled the hard case off his passenger seat, and walked toward the side door. He should have just made his delivery and left. That's what a smart man would have done. Drop the unit, get the signature, take the check, go home. Fix Lily's backpack for real this time. But Michael Carter had never once in his life been able to walk past a machine that was hurting. Inside the hangar was chaos dressed up as order. Michael found a man with a clipboard and a headset who seemed to be in charge of the maintenance side, a stocky guy in his 50s named Reggie, who took one look at the hard case and exhaled with relief. "You're the nav unit guy, Carter?" "That's me." "Oh, thank God, at least something's going right today." Reggie signed for it without even opening the case, then rubbed his eyes. "You want the check? It's gotta come from accounting, and accounting is losing their minds right now, so give me an hour." "What's going on?" Michael asked. He nodded toward the jet. "That's the one that won't start, the one on the news." Reggie laughed, but there was no humor in it. "That's the one. 6 days. 6 days, Carter. We've had engineers in here from 3 different manufacturers. 20 of the best avionics guys in the country. The lady flew a team in from overseas on her own dime. Nobody can figure it out. What's it doing? That's the thing. It's not doing anything. That's the problem." Reggie waved a hand at the aircraft like it was a stubborn child. "Engines are perfect. We tore into them. Electrical's perfect. Wiring's perfect. Fuel system, hydraulics, all of it perfect. We've run every test in the book twice. The jet is in flawless condition. It just won't start. It sits there and it says, 'System not ready,' and it will not tell us why." Michael set down his own toolbox. He never went anywhere without it, and looked across the hangar at the jet. "System not ready," he repeated. "Yeah. Not system failure, not fault detected, just not ready." Reggie blinked. "Yeah. Actually, yeah, that's exactly the message." "Why?" Michael didn't answer right away. Because across the room on a diagnostic screen, mounted on a rolling cart, he could just barely make out the readout. And there was something in the pattern of it, the sequence of the codes, the way one line kept looping back to another, that pulled at something in the back of his mind. Something old. Something he'd seen before. Not in a luxury jet. He'd never touched a luxury jet in his life. He'd seen it in the Air Force 20 years ago, on a military transport that everyone swore was broken, and nobody could fix. He'd been a kid then, barely out of training, and he'd stood at the back of a crowd of senior technicians who all agreed the aircraft needed a full electrical replacement. And his father, who happened to be visiting the base that week, had walked up, looked at the screen for 10 seconds and said, "That's not electrical. That machine's confused about who it is." Michael's mouth had gone slightly dry. "Reggie," he said quietly, "who's the woman on the news, the CEO?" "Whitmore. Sophia Whitmore. She owns all of this." Reggie lowered his voice. "And between you and me, she's about 2 days from losing her whole company. She's got a summit Friday. Investors flying in from everywhere. If she doesn't get on this jet and show up, the deal falls apart, and I hear it's the kind of deal that keeps the lights on around here." He shook his head. "She offered $1 million this morning, to anybody who can fix it. Put it right out there on the news. And you know what happened? What? 200 people showed up. 200. Engineers, hobbyists, cranks, con men, one guy who I swear thought he could fix it with a magnet. Every single one of them failed. She's had them coming through here since 8 this morning. It's a circus." Reggie sighed. "The money's real, though. That part's real. She's desperate." Michael looked back at the screen. "System not ready. Understand why the machine is afraid to work. Hey," he said. "Reggie, would it be all right if I looked at it?" Reggie stared at him. Then he laughed, not cruelly, but the way you laugh at a kid who says he wants to fly to the moon. "Carter, come on. You do nav units out of a shop the size of my garage. No offense. But we've had the best in the world in here, and they couldn't—" "None taken," Michael said. "But would it be all right?" Reggie opened his mouth to say no. And then he stopped and something crossed his face, the look of a man who had run out of every other idea and had nothing left but bad ones. "You know what?" he said. "I'm not the one who decides that, but she's right over there. If you got the nerve to ask her, that's your business." He pointed across the hangar to a woman standing apart from everyone else. Sophia Whitmore did not look like a woman who was about to lose everything. She looked, Michael thought, like she was made of the same material as her aircraft, polished, precise, expensive, and cold. She was 34 years old, and she wore it like armor. Dark suit, dark hair pulled back tight, arms crossed, watching the latest failed expert pack up his equipment with an expression that gave away nothing at all. But Michael had spent his whole life learning to see the truth underneath the surface. And underneath, he could see it. She was terrified. It was in the way her jaw stayed locked. It was in the way she hadn't blinked in too long. It was in the way she stood alone in a room full of people, because the higher you climb, the fewer people you can afford to look weak in front of. He walked toward her. A younger man in an immaculate suit intercepted him halfway. An assistant or a junior engineer. Someone whose entire job seemed to be standing between Sophia Whitmore and the world. "Can I help you?" the man said in a tone that meant the opposite. "I'd like to speak with Ms. Whitmore." The man looked him over. The faded jacket, the toolbox, the name on the pocket. "Are you here about the reward?" "I'm here to make a delivery, but I'd like to look at the aircraft." The younger man actually smiled. "Sir, we've had aerospace engineers with 30 years of experience in here today. With respect, what exactly do you think you're going to—" "Let him through, Daniel." The voice came from behind him. Sophia Whitmore had heard the whole thing. She uncrossed her arms and looked at Michael with those cold, exhausted eyes, and for a long moment she said nothing at all. "You're the navigation repair," she said finally. "Reggie mentioned you. Small shop county line." "Yes, ma'am." "And you want to look at my aircraft?" "I do." "Why?" It was a real question, not a dismissal. She was too tired for dismissals. She genuinely wanted to know why a man like him thought he could do what men with far more money and far more education had failed to do. Michael thought about how to answer. He could have lied. He could have puffed himself up, listed credentials, tried to sound like the men who'd already failed. But his father had never lied about a machine in his life, and Michael wasn't going to start over one now. "Because I think everybody who's looked at it so far has been looking in the same place," he said. "And I don't think the problem is where they're looking." Sophia's eyebrow moved a fraction of an inch. "That's a bold thing to say about 20 engineers. I'm not saying they're not smart, ma'am. They're smarter than me. I'm saying they all learn the same way, so they all look the same way. And when everybody looks the same way, sometimes everybody misses the same thing." Across the hangar, Daniel scoffed. One of the manufacturer's engineers, a tall man with silver hair and an expensive watch, had drifted close enough to hear, and now he laughed openly. "That's precious," the silver-haired man said. "Let me guess. You've got a feeling, a gut instinct. The wise, simple mechanic who sees what us fools with our engineering degrees can't." He turned to Sophia. "Ms. Whitmore, we don't have time for folklore. This aircraft has a 9-figure value, and I'm not going to stand here while some—" "What's your name?" Sophia asked. She was looking at Michael, not the engineer. "Michael Carter. And if you're wrong—" "Mr. Carter, if you touch that system and you make it worse, do you understand what you'd be responsible for?" "I understand exactly what it's worth," Michael said. "I understand it better than the reward you're offering. And I'll tell you the same thing I'd tell you if it was a $50 radio. If I'm wrong, I'll walk out that door and you'll never hear from me again. But if I'm right," he glanced at the aircraft, "then that machine has been trying to tell all of you what's wrong for 6 days, and it's just been waiting for somebody to listen." The silver-haired engineer opened his mouth again. "Enough, Gerald," Sophia said quietly. She stared at Michael Carter for what felt to him like a very long time. And in that stare, he saw a person doing math, the math of the desperate weighing everything to lose against the last thing left to try. "You have degrees, Mr. Carter." 1. Aircraft maintenance from my time in the Air Force, and 35 years of my father's notes. "Your father was an engineer. My father was a mechanic," Michael said. "Same as me. He was the best I ever saw. He died with 11 people at his funeral, and nothing to his name but a notebook." He held her gaze. "And I'd bet that notebook against every engineer in this room." Something changed in Sophia Whitmore's face then. Just slightly. Just for a second. It was the look of a person who had also once been the one nobody believed in. "Gerald," she said without turning around. How many more of your solutions do we have left to try? Gerald's jaw tightened. Ms. Whitmore, we're pursuing several. That's what you said yesterday. And the day before. She finally looked away from Michael, and when she looked at her own engineering team, her voice was flat and hard. 6 days, 200 people. Nobody in this room has given me anything but reasons it should already be working, so I'm going to let the man with the notebook try. Does anybody have a real objection or just a wounded ego? Nobody spoke. She turned back to Michael. You get access to the system, she said. You touch nothing physical without Reggie standing next to you. And you tell me right now before you start what you think is wrong, so that when you fail at least, I'll know you were honest. Michael set his toolbox down beside the diagnostic cart. He looked at the screen, really looked at it now up close, and everything he'd suspected from across the room settled into certainty in his chest. I don't think anything's broken, he said. I don't think there's a single part on this aircraft that needs replacing. I think that somewhere in the startup sequence, in the part of the system that runs before the engines even try to turn over, the part that checks whether the aircraft believes it's safe to fly, something got corrupted. A tiny file. Something small enough that every test you ran skipped right over it, because your tests are looking for damage, and this isn't damage. This is confusion. He tapped the edge of the screen. The aircraft thinks it's unsafe to start. It's not broken. It's afraid. And until somebody tells it the truth, it's never going to turn over, no matter how many engines you replace. The hangar had gone very quiet. Gerald's face had lost some of its color, though he'd have died before admitting why. Because in 6 days, with 20 engineers and 3 manufacturers, and every test in the book, not one single person had said the word sequence. Not one person had looked at the layer Michael was pointing to. They'd all checked the hardware. They'd all checked for damage. Nobody had thought to ask the machine why it was afraid. Sophia Whitmore looked at Michael Carter for a long, long moment. Reggie, she said finally, her eyes never leaving Michael's face. Get this man whatever he needs. Reggie moved fast for a man his size. He wheeled the diagnostic cart closer, dragged over a stool, and started pulling cables out of a hard case, but his hands were shaking just enough for Michael to notice. 6 days of failure did that to a man. It got into the hands. You tell me what you need, and I'll get it, Reggie said. But I gotta be straight with you, Carter. I've watched 20 guys sit on that exact stool. Every one of them started out talking like they had it figured. Every one of them ended up packing their bag and not looking anybody in the eye on the way out. I believe you, Michael said. He was already opening his own toolbox, the small, scarred one he'd carried for 20 years. Do me a favor. Don't tell me what any of them tried. Reggie frowned. Why not? Might save you some time. Because if I know what they tried, I'll start thinking the way they thought. And the way they thought is why we're all standing here. Michael pulled out a diagnostic cable of his own, an old one, the connector worn smooth. I need to come at this like nobody's touched it, like it's fresh. Behind them, Gerald let out a short, sharp breath through his nose. He hadn't left. Of course he hadn't left. Men like Gerald never left when their expertise was on trial. He stood with his arms folded and his silver watch catching the light, and he watched Michael Carter kneel down in front of a $90 million aircraft with a cable that looked older than the men who'd designed the plane. You know that port's proprietary, Gerald said. That cable won't even... The connector clicked home. Gerald stopped talking. It's an older standard underneath, Michael said, not unkindly. They always leave the old standard in. Engineers who build these things know something the engineers who fix them forget. You never fully throw away the old way. You just bury it under the new one. He glanced up. My father used to say the same thing about people. Sophia Whitmore had not moved. She stood exactly where she'd been, arms crossed, but her eyes had narrowed, and Michael understood that he was now being watched with an intensity he hadn't felt since the Air Force. This was a woman who missed nothing. This was a woman who had built an empire out of catching the details other people let slip. And right now, every ounce of that attention was pointed at him. The screen woke up. Lines of data began to scroll, and Michael leaned in close. His elbows on his knees, and for the first time all day, the noise of the hangar seemed to fall away from him completely. He wasn't in a room full of reporters and engineers and a desperate billionaire anymore. He was just a man and a machine, and the machine was trying to tell him something. 10:41 in the morning. That was the time on the corner of the screen. Michael would remember it later, the exact minute he sat down, because everything that happened next happened faster than anyone in that room expected. "Talk to me," he murmured. Not to anyone, to the aircraft. "What did you say?" Sophia asked. "Nothing. Habit." He didn't look up. "My daughter thinks I'm crazy. I talk to the machines. Been doing it since I was a kid, watching my dad do it." "And do they talk back?" There was an edge in her voice, and Michael knew what it was. It wasn't mockery. It was hope disguised as doubt, because hope was too dangerous for her to show plainly. If she let herself hope, and this man failed like all the others, the fall would be too far. "They tell the truth," Michael said. "Every time. People lie. Machines don't know how." He scrolled. "The trick is, you gotta ask the right question. All these codes on the screen, they're not the problem. They're the machine answering questions your engineers asked. And your engineers kept asking, 'Are you broken?' And the machine keeps saying no. So they ask again, 'Are you sure you're not broken?' And it says, 'No, I'm not broken.' Round and round for 6 days. Then what's the right question?" Michael's finger stopped moving on the screen. "The right question," he said slowly, "is not, 'Are you broken?' It's, 'Why won't you start?' Those aren't the same thing. A machine can be perfect and still refuse to run. Just like a man can be healthy and still refuse to get out of bed." He tapped a line of code. "Something in here is telling this aircraft that if it starts those engines, something bad happens. And it believes that. So it's protecting itself. And it's protecting everybody who'd be on board. That's not a malfunction. That's the safety system working exactly the way it's supposed to. It's just working off a lie somebody accidentally told it." 10:44, 3 minutes in. Gerald unfolded his arms. That's a nice story, but the initialization layer self-validates. It runs a checksum every single boot. If there were a corrupted file, the system would flag it. It would throw a fault. It doesn't. We checked." "You checked whether it throws a fault," Michael said. "Did you check whether the checksum itself is telling the truth?" Silence. "A checksum's just a machine checking its own homework." Michael went on, and now he did look up, and he looked straight at Gerald, and there was nothing cruel in it, but there was nothing soft either. "If the answer key's wrong, the machine passes itself every time. It never knows it's wrong. It just knows it matches. And it'll match a lie all day long and call it the truth." He turned back to the screen. "That's what's happening here. Somewhere in this sequence there's a file that got corrupted, and then the checksum for that file got corrupted right along with it, so they agree with each other. The machine checks its work, sees that the file matches the key, and says, 'Perfect, no fault.' But they're both wrong. They're just wrong together." Reggie made a low sound in his throat. "Oh my God." "What?" Sophia said sharply. "What is it?" "He might—" Reggie stopped himself. "I don't want to say it. I don't want to jinx it. But nobody said that. In 6 days, nobody said that." Gerald's face had gone tight. "It's theoretically possible for a checksum to be co-corrupted, yes, but the probability of that happening naturally is—" "Who said it happened naturally?" Michael asked. And the whole room seemed to tilt. 10:46. Sophia took one step forward. Just one. But it was the first time she'd moved from her spot in 20 minutes. "What do you mean naturally? What are you saying?" Michael didn't answer right away. Because he'd found something. On the screen, buried 3 layers down in a place none of the diagnostic tools bothered to look, because there was no reason anything should ever be, there was a timestamp. A single line. The moment the initialization file had last been written. And it was recent. 6 days recent. Michael stared at it. The aircraft had been fine 7 days ago. It had flown, landed, sat in the hangar. And then, sometime in the night before it was supposed to start refusing to work, something had rewritten a file. it had no business rewriting. Something had reached into the part of the machine that decides whether it's safe to fly, and it had changed a single small thing, and then it had corrupted the checksum so the change would never get caught. Machines don't do that on their own. "Mr. Carter," Sophia said, and her voice had dropped very low. "Answer me." Michael sat back on the stool. He rubbed his jaw with the back of his hand, a smear of old grease under his fingernails, and he made a decision that a smarter man, a more careful man, might not have made. He decided to tell her the truth in front of everybody, because the alternative was to pull the CEO aside and whisper it, and something told him that whispering in this room would be a mistake. "Ms. Whitmore," he said, "I don't think your aircraft failed. I think somebody made it fail." For one full second, nobody in the hangar breathed. Then Gerald laughed, and it was too loud, and it came out wrong. "Oh, that's now it's sabotage. Now we've gone from folklore to conspiracy. Ms. Whitmore, this is exactly what I warned you about. You let one of these people in and suddenly there's a boogeyman." "The file was rewritten 6 days ago," Michael said flat and clear, cutting straight through him. "It's on the screen. Anybody who knows where to look can see it. 7 days ago, this aircraft was perfect. 6 days ago, somebody changed one file in the exact place where nobody thinks to check and then covered it up in the exact way that would make it look like the machine did it to itself." He looked at Gerald. "I'm not accusing anybody in this room. I'm telling you what the machine is telling me, and the machine doesn't know how to lie." 10:48. Sophia Whitmore's face had gone very still, and Michael watched something move behind her eyes fast, like a woman flipping through a file of everyone she'd ever trusted. "Show me," she said. "The timestamp. Show me exactly where it is." Michael turned the screen so she could see. He pointed. She leaned in a billionaire in a $2,000 suit, bent over a diagnostic cart, squinting at a line of code a mechanic was pointing to with a grease-stained finger, and she read it. Michael watched her read it. He watched her understand it. And he watched the color leave her face by degrees the way it does when a person realizes that the disaster they've been living through for 6 days is not an accident. It's a message. "Who has access to this layer?" she said. Not to Michael, to Gerald, to Reggie, to the room. Who, physically, could reach this file? Reggie swallowed. "Ms. Whitmore, this layer, you'd have to have the maintenance credentials. And you'd have to know it exists. Most techs go their whole career and never touch it. It's not in the manual. You'd have to have been trained on the deep architecture specifically. So a short list. A very short list." "How short?" Reggie glanced involuntarily at Gerald, and Gerald went white. "Now hold on," Gerald said. "Hold on. You are not going to stand there and let a county line grease monkey with a made-up story point the finger at me. I have 30 years. Nobody pointed at you, Gerald." Sophia's voice was ice. Now ice all the way down. "Reggie looked at you." "Why did Reggie look at you?" "Because I'm the senior architect on this platform. Because I'm the only one in this building who—" He stopped. He heard it. Everybody heard it. He had just in his own defense confirmed that he was one of the only people who could have done exactly what Michael Carter said had been done. 10:50. The hangar was dead silent except for the far-off hum of ventilation. Reporters, mercifully, were still outside the gate. Whatever happened in the next few minutes was going to happen without a single camera on it, and Michael had the strange thought that this might be the most important thing that ever happened to him, and no one would ever film it. "I need to keep going," Michael said quietly. Sophia didn't take her eyes off Gerald. "Go." "Ma'am, I want to be clear about something first." Michael waited until she looked at him. "I can fix this. I'm almost sure I can fix this, and I can probably do it fast because whoever did it wasn't trying to destroy the aircraft. They were trying to delay you. If they wanted it destroyed, they'd have done something a lot worse and a lot messier. This is clean. This is surgical. Somebody wanted your jet to sit in this hangar until Friday, and not 1 minute longer." He held her gaze. "Which means somebody knew about Friday. Somebody knew what missing that summit would cost you." Sophia's jaw worked. "Everyone knew about Friday. It's been in every trade publication for a month. Not everyone knew which file to corrupt to make sure you missed it." She closed her eyes for just a moment. When she opened them, something in her had hardened into a shape Michael recognized, because he'd seen it in his father, and he'd felt it in himself the day his father died. It was the look of a person who has decided to stop being afraid and start being furious instead. "Fix my aircraft, Mr. Carter," she said. "And when you're done, we are going to have a very long conversation about who exactly did not want me in Zurich on Friday." "Yes, ma'am." He turned back to the screen. And now, finally, he let himself go all the way in. 10:52. The thing about the deep initialization layer, the thing that made it so perfect a place to hide a lie, was that it ran before almost everything else. Before the engines, before the flight computers fully woke up, before the pilot ever touched a switch. It was the part of the aircraft that opened its eyes in the morning and decided in a few thousandths of a second whether it was whole. And if it decided it wasn't whole, it simply refused to go any further. It wouldn't explain. It wouldn't complain. It would just sit there, perfect and silent and unmovable, like a horse that won't cross a bridge it's decided is unsafe. Michael had seen this exact thing once before. On that military transport 20 years ago with his father standing beside him. He remembered his father crouching down in front of the panel and going quiet, the way Michael was quiet now, and he remembered the senior techs shifting on their feet and muttering that the old man was wasting everyone's time, and he remembered his father saying without turning around, "The machine's not lost, gentlemen. It knows exactly where it is. You're the ones who are lost." Michael found the corrupted file in 14 seconds. He almost laughed. Not because it was funny, but because it was so small. 3 kilobytes. A speck. In an aircraft with millions of lines of code and terabytes of data, the thing that had beaten 200 experts and threatened to bring down a company worth billions was a file smaller than a photograph of Lily on his phone. "Found it," he said. "You found it." Reggie nearly fell off his stool. "Where?" "Right where it's supposed to be. That's the whole trick. It's not hiding somewhere strange. It's sitting in exactly the right spot, doing exactly the wrong thing." Michael's finger traced the line. It's the safety validation file for the navigation initialization. When the aircraft wakes up, this is one of the first things it reads. It's supposed to say, "Navigation is ready, it's safe to proceed." And instead, somebody changed it to say, "Navigation is not ready, do not proceed." One flag. One tiny flag flipped from safe to unsafe. And then they corrupted the checksum so the machine would never notice its own answer key had been switched. 10:54. "So you just flip it back," Gerald said, and there was something desperate in it now, something that wanted this to be simpler than it was, so that it would prove Michael was just lucky. "If it's one flag, you just flip it back and it starts. That's it. That's your genius." "No," Michael said. "If I just flip the flag, the checksum won't match anymore, and the machine will finally notice something's wrong, and now it'll throw a real fault. A hard one. It'll lock the whole initialization layer to protect itself, because as far as it's concerned, somebody's tampering with its safety system in real time, which technically..." He glanced up. "Somebody is." Reggie exhaled. "So what do? I have to fix them in the right order, and I have to do it clean in one pass without the system deciding halfway through that it's under attack. If I get the order wrong, or if I'm too slow and it revalidates while I'm in the middle..." Michael shook his head. "It could lock the initialization layer permanently, and a permanent lock on this layer means the aircraft never trusts its own startup sequence again, not without a full factory reflash. And a full factory reflash takes 3 weeks, Sophia said. Her voice was hollow. "Minimum. We confirmed that on day 2. "Then Friday's gone," Michael said. "And so is your summit. And so is whatever the person who did this was trying to protect." The weight of it settled over the whole room. One pass. One chance. If Michael Carter was as good as he thought he was, the jet would start. If he was a fraction less than that, if his hands shook the way Reggie's had, if he misread one line, if the machine decided 1/2 second too early that it was being attacked, then the man who'd been so certain would be the man who finished the job the saboteur had started. He'd be the one who bricked a $90 million aircraft. He'd be the last name on a very long list of people who'd failed, except his failure would be the one that killed it for good. Michael thought about Lily. About the backpack strap held together with wire. About the check from the nav unit that he still hadn't collected sitting somewhere in an accounting office enough to cover rent and groceries and not $1 more. He thought about how if he stood up right now and said, "This is beyond me, ma'am. I'm sorry," he could still walk out of here with that check and his reputation intact, and nobody would ever blame him because 200 better credentialed men had already failed and gone home. And then he thought about his father crouched in front of that panel 20 years ago, and the way the old man had said, "You're the ones who are lost." "I need everybody to step back," Michael said. He stood up, rolled his shoulders once and cracked his neck. "Not because I'm being dramatic. Because if somebody bumps this cart while I'm in the middle of it, we lose the aircraft. So I need room, and I need quiet, and I need 4 minutes. Sophia looked at him. 4 minutes, give or take. Once I start, I can't stop, so I want to start clean. He paused. And ma'am, I want you to know something before I do this. If it doesn't work, it's not because the aircraft can't be saved. It's because I couldn't save it. The machine's fine. It's been fine the whole time. Anything that goes wrong in the next 4 minutes is on me, not on it. I don't want you giving up on this jet just because some county line mechanic couldn't pull it off. You get somebody better if I fail. You hear me? Don't let them scrap it. It's not broken. For a moment, Sophia Whitmore didn't say anything at all. She just looked at this man in the faded jacket who 30 seconds before attempting the hardest thing he'd ever done was worried about protecting the machine's reputation instead of his own. "Reggie," she said, "clear the area. Nobody within 10 feet of that cart. Gerald?" Her eyes flicked to him cold as the ramp outside in January. "You stay exactly where I can see you. You don't move. You don't touch anything. If this man is right about what happened to my aircraft, you and I both know why." Gerald's mouth opened. Then it closed. He stayed. 10:57. The hangar cleared back. Reggie herded the technicians away with both arms out like he was parting a sea. The manufacturer's people, the assistants, the security guard who'd wandered in from the side door to see what the fuss was, all of them drifted back until there was a wide empty circle around one rolling cart and one man on a stool. Michael sat down. He put both hands flat on his own knees for a second and just breathed. In through the nose, out through the mouth, the way his father had taught him to do, before any job that mattered, because his father said, panic lives in the breath, and if you control the breath, you control the panic. Then he reached into his toolbox and took out the notebook. He didn't need it. He'd memorized every page. But he set it on the corner of the cart anyway, closed its soft cloth cover facing up because some part of him wanted the old man in the room. He put his hand flat on the cover for just a second. "All right, Dad," he said, too quiet for anyone to hear. "Let's listen." Across the empty circle, Sophia Whitmore watched a grown man rest his hand on a battered notebook like it was a Bible, and she felt something move in her chest that she hadn't felt in a very long time. Something she couldn't name and didn't have time to examine because Michael Carter had just placed his fingers on the keys and gone completely, utterly still. "Starting now," he said. 10:58, minute 1. He had to isolate the conflict before he touched anything. That was the part, nobody understood the part, that looked like doing nothing. For the first 40 seconds, Michael didn't change a single value. He just walled off the corrupted file from the rest of the system, drew a fence around it, so that when he finally reached in, the machine would see him working inside a sealed room instead of tampering with a live safety system. It was the difference between a surgeon draping off the incision and a stranger reaching into someone's chest at a dinner party. Same motion. Completely different outcome. "He's not doing anything," Gerald muttered. "He's just sitting there. He's stalling." "Be quiet," Sophia said without looking at him. The fence held. Michael felt it more than saw it, the way you feel a door click shut in a dark house. The corrupted file was sealed off now, isolated, and the rest of the aircraft went on believing everything was normal, unaware that a mechanic had just quietly quarantined the lie at the center of its own mind. Minute 2. Now the dangerous part. Now he had to reset the corrupted sequence reach into the sealed room and change the flag back from unsafe to safe. But he couldn't just flip it because the corrupted checksum was still sitting there, still ready to raise the alarm the instant the file changed. So he had to do both at once. Change the file and rewrite the checksum in the same breath so fast that from the machine's point of view, they were never out of agreement for even a single cycle. The file would go from lying to telling the truth, and its answer key would change to match, and the machine would never see the seam. Michael's hands moved. They did not shake. 20 years of nav units, 10,000 cold coffees, 6 years of raising a little girl alone, and never once letting her see him scared. All of it had gone into these hands, and now the hands did exactly what they'd been trained to do, no faster and no slower than the job required, while the man they belonged to breathed slow and even, and listened to a machine tell him the truth. Minute 3. "Come on," Reggie whispered. "Come on, come on." The reset took. The flag read safe. The checksum agreed. But Michael wasn't done, and this was the part that separated him from every other person who might have gotten this far, because a lesser mechanic would have stopped here, would have said, "Done," would have told the pilot to hit the start, and the aircraft would have booted, and it would have run. And 3 weeks later, or 3 months, at 39,000 feet over the Atlantic, the backup system that Michael hadn't synchronized would have woken up, checked the primary, found a mismatch. It didn't understand and thrown exactly the kind of fault you never ever want to see in the air. His father had a line for that too. "The job's not done when it starts. The job's done when it's safe." So Michael synchronized the backup. He brought the redundant initialization system into agreement with the one he'd just repaired, matched them cycle for cycle, so that the aircraft's two brains told each other the same true story instead of one truth and one buried lie. It took 11 seconds. Nobody in that hangar knew those were the 11 most important seconds of the whole 4 minutes. Nobody except Michael and a dead man whose notebook was sitting on the corner of the cart. Minute 4. Michael sat back. He looked at the screen. Every value he needed to see was where it needed to be. The fence came down. He released the file back into the living system and he watched. This was the moment. This was the held breath. This was where it all either worked or didn't. He watched the aircraft wake up its own initialization layer and read the file for the first time since he'd touched it. The machine checked its homework. The homework was right. And the answer key was right. And for the first time in 6 days, they were both right about the same true thing. The screen changed. Every warning that had glowed on that display for 6 days, every red flag, every amber caution, every line of protest the aircraft had been putting up to keep itself and everyone aboard it safe from a danger that had never actually existed went dark. And in their place, one by one, and then all at once the indicators turned green. Michael didn't celebrate. He didn't even smile. He just let out a breath he felt like he'd been holding for 20 years, and he reached over and put his hand on the notebook one more time. "Try it," he said. Nobody moved. "Somebody get me the commander," Michael said a little louder. "Try to start it." The aircraft commander, a gray-haired pilot named Hollis, who had watched the whole thing from the edge of the circle with his arms crossed and his face unreadable, uncrossed his arms. He looked at Sophia. She nodded once. And Hollis climbed the stairs into the cockpit of an aircraft that 200 people had failed to start moving, like a man who did not believe for 1 second that this was going to work and was only doing it because his boss told him to. 11:02. Michael stood up from the stool. His knees ached. He hadn't noticed until now. He picked up the notebook and held it against his chest with one hand, the way you'd hold something you were afraid to drop, and he turned to face the aircraft, and so did everyone else. The whole hangar turned to face the Aurora, at the same time every set of eyes on those two enormous engines that had sat cold and silent for 6 days, while a company bled money, and a woman lay awake at night, and a saboteur somewhere counted down to Friday. In the cockpit, Hollis flipped the switches he'd flipped 100 times that week to no effect. For one horrible second nothing happened. Sophia Whitmore's hand rose slowly to her mouth. And then the engines caught. The sound came up from nothing. a low turbine whine that climbed and filled the enormous space until Michael could feel it in his teeth, in his ribs, in the soles of his boots, on the concrete floor. The Aurora came alive all at once, every system spinning up exactly the way its designers had meant it to, and the whine became a roar, and the roar became the unmistakable, gorgeous, thunderous sound of $90 million of aircraft waking up and remembering finally that it had never been broken at all. Somebody shouted, then somebody else. Reggie had both fists in the air and tears standing in his eyes, and he was yelling something nobody could hear over the engines. The technicians who'd been herded back to the walls came surging forward, whooping, slapping each other. And one of the manufacturer's engineers, one of the men who'd laughed at Michael an hour ago, just stood there with his hand over his mouth, shaking his head, staring at the aircraft like it had risen from the dead. Gerald did not cheer. Gerald had gone the color of ash, and he was already very quietly taking one step backward toward the side door. But Michael Carter wasn't watching Gerald, and he wasn't watching the aircraft, and he wasn't hearing the cheering. Michael Carter was watching Sophia Whitmore because Sophia Whitmore had not moved, and had not cheered, and had not taken her hand from her mouth. She was standing perfectly still, in the middle of all that noise and joy, with her eyes locked on him, and there were tears running down a face that Michael would have sworn an hour ago had forgotten how to make them. She wasn't crying because he'd started her jet. Michael understood that somehow from all the way across the hangar. She wasn't crying about the aircraft, or the summit, or the money, or even the sabotage. She was crying because for 6 days, the smartest and richest and most credentialed people in the entire industry had stood in this exact spot and told her it couldn't be done. And every single one of them had been wrong, and the one person who'd been right was a man. Everybody in the room had looked straight through. The moment he walked in with a toolbox and a name stitched on his jacket. She was crying because the person the whole world had ignored had turned out to be the only person who understood. The engines roared. Hollis's voice came crackling over a handset in Reggie's hand, thin and shaking, and full of disbelief. Reggie, tell me you're seeing this. She's green across the board. Every board. She's my God, she's ready to fly. Who did this, Reggie? Who the hell did this? And Reggie, laughing and crying at the same time, keyed the handset and looked across the empty circle at a single father in a faded gray jacket, holding a dead man's notebook against his chest. And he said the only thing there was to say. The guy with the toolbox, Reggie said. The guy nobody let in. Gerald made it 4 steps toward the side door before Sophia's voice caught him. Gerald, where are you going? She hadn't raised her voice. She didn't have to. The engines were winding down now, Hollis easing them back to idle in the cockpit, and in the falling noise, her question landed with the weight of a dropped tool on concrete. Gerald stopped. He turned around with a smile already assembled on his face, the kind of smile a man practices in a mirror. I was going to call the summit coordinators. Let them know we'll make Friday after all. Somebody has to handle logistics, and God knows it's been a long 6 days for all of us. You can call them from right here. Sophia. Ms. Whitmore, she corrected. And the temperature in the hangar dropped 10 degrees. 11:06. Michael Carter watched all of this from the middle of the circle, still holding his father's notebook against his chest, and he did the thing he'd trained himself to do his whole life. He got quiet, and he listened. Because a room Michael knew was just another kind of machine. It had inputs and outputs. It had things that told the truth, and things that lied. And right now the room was telling him that the smiling man by the door was the loudest lie in it. Reggie appeared at Michael's elbow, his eyes still wet, and gripped his shoulder hard enough to hurt. Carter, I don't how did you 6 days, man. 6 days and you... He couldn't finish. He just shook his head and squeezed harder. It wasn't me, Michael said quietly. It was the machine. It told me everything. I just listened. Bull, Reggie said, but he was grinning. That's the most modest bull I ever heard in my life. Across the circle, Sophia had not looked away from Gerald. Reggie, she called. You said something a few minutes ago. You said only a very short list of people could reach that layer. People who'd been trained on the deep architecture. Say it again. Say it loud enough for the room." Reggie's grin died. He looked at Michael, then at Gerald, then at Sophia, and Michael watched the man understand that he was being asked to point a finger in front of 40 witnesses. "Ms. Whitmore," Reggie said carefully, I'm a maintenance lead. I fix things. I don't want to accuse anybody of—" "I'm not asking you to accuse, I'm asking you to answer. Who in this company has been trained to work in the deep initialization layer?" Reggie swallowed. "3 people. Me. And I don't know how, but somebody did it and it wasn't me, and I'll swear that on anything you put in front of me." "That's 2 names short of 3, Reggie. And Gerald. Gerald wrote half the architecture. And—" Reggie hesitated, and something flickered across his face, some memory surfacing. "And there was a 3rd guy. Tomas Reyes. But he left. 8-9 months ago. Went to a competitor. He doesn't even have credentials anymore. They'd have been revoked when he left." Sophia finished softly. "Or when we think he left." 11:09. Michael saw it happen in Gerald's face. Just a flash. The mention of the name Tomas Reyes did something to Gerald, some tiny, involuntary thing around the eyes, and Michael had spent 20 years reading gauges that other people swore were working fine, and he knew a needle twitch when he saw one. "That's the name," Michael said. Everyone turned to him. "I'm sorry," Michael said. "I don't know anybody here. I don't know your history. But I fix machines, and part of fixing a machine is watching how everybody in the room reacts when you get close to what's really wrong." And when Reggie said Tomas Reyes, one man in this hangar flinched. He looked at Gerald. "You knew that name was coming. You've been waiting for it since the second the engine started." "This is outrageous," Gerald said. "This is a mechanic, a repairman. He fixed a software fault, congratulations, and now he thinks he's a detective. Sophia, Ms. Whitmore, you cannot possibly be listening to this." "I'm listening to all of it," Sophia said. "That's the problem for you, Gerald. I've been listening for 6 days. I just wasn't hearing the right things." She took a step toward him. "Tomas Reyes was your protege. You brought him in. You trained him yourself. You vouched for him for 4 years. And when he left for Aldridge Aerospace, you told me it was amicable. You told me not to worry about the deep architecture access, because you'd personally overseen the revocation of his credentials. I did revoke them. Did you?" The question hung there. 11:11. Michael watched Gerald's jaw move, watched the man reach for words and come up with nothing usable. And in that silence, Michael understood that he'd wandered into something a great deal bigger than a corrupted file on an airplane. This wasn't one man having a bad day. This was months of somebody's plan, and Michael had walked in off the street 40 minutes ago and put his grease-stained finger right on the center of it. "Ms. Whitmore," Gerald said finally, and his voice had changed. The smile was gone. The bluster was gone. What was left was quieter and colder, and Michael thought far more honest. "You are about to accuse a 30-year veteran of your industry of sabotage in front of your entire maintenance crew based on the say-so of a man who repairs radios out of a shed. Think very carefully about how that looks. Think about what a lawyer would do with it." "A lawyer," Sophia repeated. "I'm just saying, for your own sake." And there it was. The threat delivered soft as a handshake. Michael had heard men talk like that before, men who held a little power over people who had less, and he felt something old and hot move in his chest. But it was Sophia who answered, and she answered with a smile that had no warmth in it at all. "You know what, Gerald? You're right. I should think very carefully. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm not going to accuse you of anything. I'm going to do something much simpler." She turned. "Reggie, that timestamp Mr. Carter found. The moment the file was rewritten. 6 days ago in the middle of the night. Can you pull the hangar access logs for that exact window? Who badged into this building?" Reggie's whole face changed. Yeah, I can pull those. Right now. 2 minutes. Do it." And Gerald, who a moment ago had been talking about lawyers, said, "That's not necessary." 11:13. The 4 words fell into the hangar, and Michael felt the whole room hear them for what they were. That's not necessary, Sophia said slowly. Why isn't it necessary, Gerald? Because the logs won't show anything useful. They log everyone. There'll be dozens of entries, cleaning crews, security. It proves nothing. Then it won't hurt to pull them. Sophia. Ms. Whitmore. Ms. Whitmore, I'm asking you as someone who has given this company 6 years. I gave this company everything I have, Sophia said, and her voice cracked. For the first time, one hairline fracture in all that ice, and Michael understood that whatever this jet meant to the room, it meant something far more personal to her. Everything, Gerald. And 6 days ago, somebody reached into my aircraft and made it lie to itself so that I would fail. So that I would stand in front of the whole industry and the whole press and beg strangers for help. Do you know what that felt like? Do you have any idea? She was breathing hard now. And the whole time, the whole 6 days, you stood next to me and told me it couldn't be helped. You told me the machine had simply failed. You told me to prepare for the worst. Because I believed. You knew, Sophia said. You knew it wasn't a failure because you knew it was a sabotage. Because on some level, you knew who did it. Maybe you didn't hold the keyboard. Maybe Thomas Reyes did it with credentials you never revoked. But you knew, Gerald. You've known for 6 days. And you let me suffer through it because... She stopped. Her eyes narrowed. Because you needed me to miss Friday too, didn't you? You and Reyes, and whoever's paying him at Aldridge. You needed Whitmore Aviation to look like it couldn't keep its own aircraft running. You needed the investors to see a company that falls apart the week of the biggest deal in its history. 11-16. The silence after that was the loudest thing Michael had ever heard. Reggie came jogging back across the hangar with a tablet in his hand, and his face told the story before his mouth did. He was pale. He handed the tablet to Sophia without a word, and pointed at one line, and Sophia looked down at it, and Michael watched her read it the same way she'd read the timestamp on the diagnostic screen. He watched her understand it. He watched something in her shoulders drop not from defeat, but from a terrible final kind of confirmation. 2:14 in the morning, she read aloud. 6 days ago, badge access to Hangar C, Deep Maintenance Bay. She looked up. Gerald Voss. The name hit the hangar like a slap. That's not... Gerald took a step back. Anybody could have used my badge. Badges get shared, they get cloned, that doesn't prove. You badged in at 2:14 a.m. Sophia said, and you badged out at 2:51, 37 minutes. In the deep maintenance bay. In the middle of the night. 6 days ago. The exact night the Aurora's initialization file was rewritten. She handed the tablet back to Reggie without looking away from Gerald. Mr. Carter said somebody who did this would have to know the aircraft was flying Friday, would have to know exactly which file to corrupt, and would have to know how to hide it, so the machine's own tests would never catch it. That's not a long list of people, Gerald. That was never a long list. It was you. It was Reggie. And it was a man you personally trained and personally vouched for, and personally failed to lock out. 11:18. Gerald Voss looked around the hangar. At the technicians who wouldn't meet his eyes. At Reggie, who was staring at him with a kind of sick betrayal. At the aircraft idling perfectly gorgeous and alive and green across every board, exposing his lie just by breathing. And finally, at Michael Carter, the man in the faded jacket who had walked in off the street with a toolbox, and in 4 minutes undone 6 days of the most careful work Gerald had ever done in his life. You have no idea what you've done, Gerald said. But he wasn't saying it to Sophia. He was saying it to Michael. You have no idea what you just walked into. No, sir, Michael agreed quietly. I don't. I just came to deliver a nav unit. And for a second, one strange second, Gerald almost laughed. A nav unit, he repeated. 6 months of planning, 200 of the best engineers in the country, and it comes apart because some radio shop mechanic shows up to drop off a part. He shook his head slowly. You want to know the truth. You want to know why nobody else found it, because nobody else was looking for a person. They were all looking for a problem. You're the only one who looked at that machine and understood that a machine can't lie to itself. Somebody has to teach it to. Gerald, Sophia said, stop talking. Why? It's over. He knows it. You know it. I knew it the second those engines caught. Gerald's voice had gone flat and strange. The voice of a man watching his own life from a distance. Aldridge offered me a seat on their board. Do you understand that a board seat? 30 years I built platforms for other people to fly on 30 years, and I watched a 34-year-old with a marketing degree turn my architecture into her empire while I got a Christmas bonus and a plaque. And Aldridge said all I had to do was make sure Whitmore missed Zurich. One summit. 1 week. Nobody gets hurt. The aircraft doesn't even get damaged. It just sits. And you go to the investors with an empty chair and no explanation. And by the time you fix it, the deal's gone, and so is your valuation. And so is my company, Sophia finished. Her voice was very quiet now. You were going to hand them my company. For a board seat. 11:21. I was going to take what I earned, Gerald said, for once. And there it was. The whole ugly thing laid open on the floor of the hangar, and nobody moved, and the engines idled, and Michael Carter stood in the middle of it holding his dead father's notebook, and understanding with a clarity that made him a little sick. Exactly what his 4 minutes had cost the man by the door, and exactly what they'd saved the woman in the middle of the room. Sophia turned to Reggie. Call security. The real security from the front office, not the gate. And call our counsel. Tell them we have a criminal matter, and I want the police here before Gerald Voss leaves this property. She paused. And pull Thomas Reyes's revoked credentials. Or rather find out why they were never revoked. I want a paper trail on every piece of this before anybody at Aldridge finds out their morning didn't go the way they planned. Reggie was already dialing. Yes, ma'am. Gerald didn't run. Michael half expected him to brace for it, even ready to step in the man's way if he bolted. But Gerald Voss just stood there deflating by the second, a proud man watching the whole architecture of his revenge collapse because of a corrupted file the size of a photograph and a mechanic who talked to airplanes. He lowered himself onto a rolling stool near the wall, and he put his face in his hands, and he didn't say anything else at all. 11:24. Sophia Whitmore let out a long breath. And then for the first time since Michael had walked into the hangar, she seemed to remember that there was a whole room full of people watching her, and that one of them had just handed her back her entire company. She turned to face Michael. Mr. Carter? Ma'am, I want you to understand what you did here today, and I don't mean the aircraft. She walked toward him slowly across the empty circle until she was standing close enough that she didn't have to raise her voice. 6 days ago, somebody I trusted decided to destroy everything I've built. And he almost did it. He came within 4 days of doing it. And the reason he didn't, the only reason he didn't, is that a man I'd never met who owed me nothing, who I very nearly had thrown off the property, sat down at that cart and refused to look at my aircraft the way everybody else looked at it. Her voice was unsteady. You saved my company today. You know that. Not the summit, not the jet, the company, all of it. Everyone who works here, their jobs, their families. You saved all of it, and you did it in 4 minutes, and you did it because your father wrote something in a notebook. Michael looked down at the notebook in his hands. He wrote a lot of things in it. What did he write? The thing you kept touching, before you started. I saw you. She wasn't embarrassed to admit she'd been watching. What does it say? Michael opened the notebook. He didn't need to, but he did it anyway, thumbing to a page near the front, worn soft, the ink faded to brown. He turned it around so she could see the handwriting, the careful, cramped letters of a man who'd spent his life with his hands inside machines and only put down words when they mattered. Before you replace the machine, Michael read, understand why the machine is afraid to work. He closed it gently. He underlined afraid twice. I used to think it was just a fix-it saying, a trick for the trade. But he meant more than machines. He always meant more than machines. He meant people, too. He meant that when something won't do what it's supposed to do, a machine, a kid, a company, anybody, you don't throw it away. You get down on its level and you figure out what it's scared of. Because everything that stops working is scared of something. Even the ones made of metal. 11:27. Sophia Whitmore looked at the closed notebook for a long moment. Then she looked at the man holding it, and Michael saw the CEO fall away from her face, just for a second, and something younger and rawer show through underneath. "My father drove a delivery truck," she said. It came out of nowhere, and Michael understood that she'd surprised herself by saying it. 26 years, same route. He used to say the same kind of thing, not about machines, about the route. He knew every pothole, every shortcut, every dog that would chase the truck. People thought it was nothing, just a guy in a truck. But he understood that route better than anyone alive, and nobody ever once asked him a single thing about it because he was just the guy in the truck. She swallowed. He died thinking he'd never mattered to anybody but us. And I built all of it, so that nobody would ever look at me the way they looked at him. And then this morning I stood in this hangar, and I looked at you exactly the way they looked at him. The jacket, the toolbox, the little shop. Her eyes were wet again. I looked right through you, Mr. Carter, same as everybody, and you turned out to be the only one who could see. Michael didn't know what to say to that, so he said the true thing, which was usually the only thing worth saying. "My dad would have liked you," he said. "He didn't like many people, but he'd have liked anybody who understood that the guy in the truck knew something." Sophia laughed a wet, startled laugh, and wiped her eyes with the back of her hand in a gesture so ordinary, so unlike the woman of ice from an hour ago, that Reggie actually did a double take from across the hangar. 11:29. "There's still a reward," Sophia said, gathering herself, the CEO reassembling piece by piece. $1 million. I said it on the news and I meant it, and God knows you've earned it 10 times over. But not here. Not in a hangar with the police on the way and Gerald over there falling apart. You'll come to my office tomorrow morning. We'll do it properly. There are things I want to talk to you about that shouldn't be said in front of 40 people and a saboteur. Ms. Whitmore, Tomorrow, Mr. Carter, 9 o'clock, and bring the notebook. She almost smiled. I want to see the rest of what your father knew. Michael thought about arguing. He thought about the check from the nav unit still sitting in accounting, about how he'd walked in this morning, hoping for enough to cover rent and a backpack, and how he was now being told to come back tomorrow to collect $1 million, and how the whole thing felt less like good fortune, and more like standing in a river that had suddenly changed direction. But he thought about Lily, about the wire twisted through the broken strap, about the drawer of bills he tried not to open, and he nodded. 9 o'clock, he said. 11:31. The front office security arrived first, 2 of them followed a few minutes later by 2 police officers who moved through the hangar with the careful neutrality of men who'd been told very little and could see that something large had happened. Reggie met them, walked them toward Gerald, spoke low and fast. Gerald stood up from the stool without being asked. He didn't resist. He didn't make a scene. He just looked one last time across the hangar at Michael Carter, and whatever was in that look, hatred or grudging respect, or the simple exhausted recognition of a man who'd been beaten by the one variable he never accounted for, Michael couldn't say. Radio shop mechanic, Gerald said, not loud, almost to himself. Yes, sir, Michael said, and Gerald let the officers walk him out. 11:34. The hangar slowly began to empty. The technicians drifted back to their stations, buzzing already telling and retelling the story that they'd be telling for the rest of their careers, the day the guy nobody let in fixed the Aurora in 4 minutes and caught a saboteur doing it. The manufacturer's engineers packed their equipment in a silence that had a lot of shame in it. Hollis climbed down from the cockpit and crossed the whole hangar just to shake Michael's hand, gripping it in both of his, saying nothing, because there wasn't anything to say that his hands didn't say better. And Michael Carter finally remembered why he'd come. Reggie, he said. My check, the nav unit. I still got to pick that up from accounting. Reggie stared at him. And then Reggie started laughing, a big, helpless laugh that bent him over at the waist, and he had to put a hand on the diagnostic cart to hold himself up. The nav unit, the Carter. Carter, you just saved a $2 billion company and caught a corporate spy, and you're worried about your invoice for a nav unit. It's $412, Michael said, and I've got rent. Reggie wiped his eyes, still laughing, and clapped him on the shoulder. Come on, you unbelievable son of a gun. Let's go get your $412. He shook his head as they walked toward the office. $1 million tomorrow, and he wants his $412 today. Nobody's gonna believe me. Nobody's ever gonna believe a word of this. 11:38. Michael stopped at the side door on his way out and looked back once at the Aurora. She was still idling, still green across every board, still filling the hangar with that low living hum. $90 million of aircraft that had spent 6 days convinced it was unsafe until somebody got down on its level and told it the truth. Michael thought about his father crouched in front of a military transport 20 years ago. He thought about a delivery truck driver who knew every pothole on a route nobody asked him about. He thought about a 9-year-old girl walking into school with a backpack strap held together by steel wire, believing with her whole heart that her father could fix anything. And for the first time in longer than he could remember, Michael Carter let himself believe she might be right. He pushed open the door, and he went to collect his $412 because the rent was due Friday, and $1 million tomorrow didn't change what was due today. That was another thing his father used to say, one that wasn't in the notebook because Michael had never needed to write it down to remember it. You take care of today's debt with today's money. Tomorrow can take care of itself. Tomorrow, as it turned out, had a great deal in store for Michael Carter. Lily didn't believe him. That was the first thing that happened when Michael got home that night. He came through the door at 6:40 with the $412 check folded in his shirt pocket, and the whole impossible day still ringing in his ears, and he sat his daughter down at the kitchen table and tried to tell her, and she looked at him like he'd grown a second head. "You fixed a jet," Lily said. "I fixed a jet. A $90 million jet. That's the one. That 200 other people couldn't fix. Give or take." Lily narrowed her eyes at him, 9 years old, and already an expert in detecting when adults were pulling her leg. "Dad, is this like the time you said you invented the paperclip?" "I never said I invented the paperclip. I said I could have." "Same thing." Michael laughed, and it surprised him how good it felt, how loose like a bolt that had been over-torqued for years finally backing off a quarter turn. "Lily, I'm telling you the truth. And tomorrow morning I have to go back, and the lady who owns the company wants to talk to me about a reward." "How much?" Michael hesitated, because he still didn't quite believe it himself, and saying it out loud to his daughter in this kitchen under this leaking faucet he still hadn't fixed felt like tempting something. "It's a lot, baby. It's more than we've ever had. It might change some things." Lily considered this with the gravity of a child who had learned young not to get her hopes up about money. Then she said, "Can we fix my backpack, the real strap, not the wire one?" And Michael Carter, who had just been told he was going to be handed $1 million, felt his throat close up completely over a request for a backpack. "Yeah," he managed. "Yeah, baby, we can fix your backpack." 7 o'clock. He made them both grilled cheese because that's what there was, and they ate it at the table, and Lily made him tell the whole story 3 times, and by the 3rd time, she believed him mostly because he wasn't smiling when he told the serious parts. She got very quiet when he told her about Gerald. "So the man broke the plane on purpose," she said. "He did. To hurt the lady. To take something from her. Yeah." Lily chewed on that, literally and otherwise. "And you caught him." "The machine caught him. I just listened." "Dad." Lily put down her grilled cheese and gave him a look far too old for her face. "You always say that. The machine did it, I just listened. But the machine can't listen to itself. That's the whole point. Somebody has to listen. And nobody else did, just you." She picked her sandwich back up. "So you caught him." Michael looked at his daughter for a long moment and thought not for the first time that she understood things he'd spent 40 years learning and that she'd understood them without anybody having to write them in a notebook. "Yeah," he said quietly. I guess I did. 9:15, she was in bed. Michael sat at the kitchen table, long after the notebook open in front of him, not reading it, just resting his hand on it, thinking about a man who'd died with 11 people at his funeral. Thinking about what his father would say about tomorrow. And somewhere around 11, he realized he already knew what his father would say because his father had said it his whole life, and Michael had spent that same whole life only half understanding it. He went to bed. He didn't sleep much. 8:40 the next morning, he pulled his truck through the Whitmore gate, and this time the guard at the booth didn't check a clipboard. The guard straightened up, actually straightened, and said, "Mr. Carter, they're expecting you. Main building, top floor. I'll radio ahead." And Michael drove past the news vans. There were more of them today, not fewer, with the strange feeling of a man who'd walked into a building yesterday as nobody, and was walking back in today as something he didn't have a word for yet. 9 o'clock exactly. He stepped off the elevator onto the top floor of Whitmore Aviation and Sophia's assistant Daniel. The same young man who'd tried to block him in the hangar met him with an expression of such complete and painful reversal that Michael almost felt sorry for him. "Mr. Carter, Ms. Whitmore's ready for you. Can I coffee, water, anything?" "Coffee's fine, black." "Right away, sir." "Sir?" Yesterday the same man had said "sir" to him like an insult. Today he said it like a prayer. Michael filed that away. His father had a line about that too, about how the same word could mean two completely opposite things, depending on how much a man wanted from you. But Michael kept it to himself and followed Daniel down a hall to a corner office with a door that was already open. 9:02. Sophia Whitmore stood when he came in. That was the first thing Michael noticed. She stood up from behind her desk, which Michael would learn later she did not do for many people, and she came around it to shake his hand, and she looked this morning like a different person than the woman of ice in the hangar. She'd slept maybe. Or maybe she just looked different when she wasn't watching her whole life burn down. "You came," she said. "You said 9 o'clock. People say a lot of things at 9 o'clock in the evening that they reconsider by 9 in the morning." She gestured him to a chair. "Sit, please. There's a great deal to talk about, and some of it isn't about money, so I'd rather we not do it standing up." Michael sat. He put the notebook on his knee where she could see he'd brought it, and he watched her notice, and he watched it please her. Daniel brought the coffee and left, closing the door behind him. "First," Sophia said, "the things you'll want to hear, so they're not hanging over the rest of the conversation. Gerald Voss was arrested last night and charged this morning. Corporate sabotage, breach of fiduciary duty, and our attorneys are adding more by the hour. Tomas Reyes, the protege, the one at Aldridge, was picked up at 6 a.m. It turns out his deep architecture credentials were never revoked because Gerald personally intercepted the revocation order 8 months ago and buried it. Which means Reyes has had a key to my aircraft for 8 months. Which means there are a lot of questions this company is going to be asking itself for a long time about how one man was able to do so much damage from the inside." She paused. "You started all of that. You understand? By finding a 3-kilobyte file, everything unspooled from there." "I'm sorry," Michael said. Sophia blinked. "Sorry. That it was somebody you trusted. That's the worst kind. A machine breaking down, that's just physics. But a person you trained, a person you vouched for." Michael shook his head. "That doesn't fix as clean. That one leaves a mark." 9:06. Sophia was quiet for a moment. When she spoke again, her voice had dropped some of its polish. "You know, in 18 hours, you're the first person who said that to me. Everybody else wanted to talk about the deal, the summit, the stock, the press. My own board called me at midnight, and not one of them asked if I was all right. They asked if we were still flying Friday." She looked at him. "You walked in, and the second thing out of your mouth was that you were sorry a friend betrayed me. Wasn't he a friend?" "I thought he was." She turned her coffee cup a slow half-turn on the desk. 30 years he was around. He was at my first company Christmas party, back when the whole company could fit in a rented room. He gave a toast. She stopped. "Anyway, that's not what you're here for." She reached into a drawer and took out a single sheet of paper and set it on the desk between them and turned it to face him, and Michael looked down at it and saw the number, and the number had a lot of zeros. $1 million. 908. It's yours? Sophia said. No conditions, no fine print, no non-disclosure that keeps you from telling your daughter what her father did. I had our counsel strip all of that out at 7 this morning. It's the cleanest contract that's ever left this building. You sign it, the money's in your account by Monday, and you never have to see this place again unless you want to. She sat back. You earned it in 4 minutes. Most people in this building will never earn it in a lifetime, and I include myself in that some days. Michael looked at the contract. He thought about the drawer of bills at home. He thought about the leaking faucet and the truck that started on the second try and the rent due Friday. He thought about Lily's backpack strap and about the real strap he'd promised her, and about all the real straps. $1 million could buy a house that was theirs, a truck that started on the first try, a college fund, a life without the drawer. He picked up the pen, and then he set it back down. 9:10. Sophia's eyebrow rose. Mr. Carter, can I ask you something first? Of course. Yesterday, in the hangar, you told me about your father, the delivery truck driver. You said he died thinking he never mattered to anybody but your family. Michael turned the pen slowly in his fingers. Did he ever get a chance, a real one? Somebody who looked at what he knew all those years, all that knowing, and said, that's worth something. Let me help you do something with it. Sophia went very still. No, she said finally. No, nobody ever did. That's what I thought. Michael set the pen down for good. See, that's the thing I couldn't sleep on last night. I kept thinking about my dad. 35 years best mechanic I ever saw, and when he died the funeral home had 11 chairs filled, and half of them were cousins. And it wasn't because he wasn't good. He was better than anybody in that hangar yesterday, Gerald included. It was because nobody ever looked at him and saw what he was. He was just the guy in the shop. Just like your dad was just the guy in the truck. And just like I was yesterday morning, just the guy with the toolbox. 9:12. Sophia hadn't moved. She was watching him with an intensity that reminded Michael of the way she'd watched him work on the aircraft. I don't want the $1 million, Michael said. The words landed in the office and just sat there. Sophia stared at him, and for the first time since he'd met her, Michael saw Sophia Whitmore completely, genuinely off balance. Not the calculated stillness of a negotiator. Actual surprise. Her mouth opened slightly. You don't... She stopped. Mr. Carter, I want to be very clear, because I've watched a lot of people play a lot of games at this desk. If this is a negotiation, if you're holding out for more, I'll tell you right now that you'll get it, because you're worth it, and I'd rather just skip to the number that makes you sign. So tell me, what's the number? There's no number, Michael said. I mean, that's not it. I do want the money. God, I want it. You have no idea how bad I want it. I've got a drawer at home I don't open because of what's in it. I want it so bad I can taste it. He leaned forward. But I don't want it for me. Or not just for me. I want it to do something. And I want to know if you'll help me do it, because I can't do it with $1 million. Not the way it needs doing. But maybe you can. 9:14. Sophia sat back slowly. Tell me what you're thinking. There are kids in my neighborhood, Michael said. Smart kids. Kids with their hands already itching to take things apart and see how they work. The next me. The next my dad. And they're never gonna get a shot because a real aviation training program costs more money than their whole family sees in 3 years. And there's no version of the world where those kids end up in a hangar unless somebody builds them a door. He tapped the notebook on his knee. My dad had a whole life of knowing in his head, and it almost died with him. It only didn't because he wrote some of it down and handed it to me. But most people don't write it down. Most people just know things their whole life, and then they die. And the knowing dies too, and nobody ever built a way to pass it on. That's the waste that keeps me up at night, not the money. The knowing. All that knowing just gone. He looked up at her. I want to build a training program, a real one, free or close to it for kids from families like mine and like yours. Not to make mechanics, Well, to make mechanics, sure, but that's not the point. The point is to build the door, so that the next kid with grease under his fingernails and a dead genius for a father doesn't have to wait until he's 41 and stumbles into the right hangar on the right day to find out he mattered all along. Michael's voice had gone rough. I want to catch them before they spend 35 years proving they belong, before they die with 11 chairs filled. 9:16. The office was silent. Sophia Whitmore looked at the man across her desk, and Michael watched her face do something complicated, and he waited because he'd said his piece, and there was nothing left to do but wait. You're turning down $1 million, she said slowly, to teach other people's children how to fix airplanes. I'm turning down $1 million for me, Michael corrected. I'm asking you to spend it on them. That's different. And I'm not doing it because I'm some kind of saint. I'm doing it because I know exactly what it costs a person to be invisible, and I've got a 9-year-old at home who thinks I can fix anything, and I'd like to be able to look at her and know it's true. He paused. $1 million fixes my house. It doesn't fix the thing that's actually broken. The thing that's broken is that good people die invisible. That's the machine I want to work on, and I can't do it alone. For a long moment, Sophia said nothing at all. Then she stood up, walked to the window and stood with her back to him. And Michael let her have the silence, because he understood better than most that some people needed to turn away before they'd let you see their face change. 9:18. My father's route, she said, finally not turning around. 26 years. You know what the company did when he retired? They gave him a jacket, a branded jacket with the company logo, one size too big, and a card everybody in the depot signed, and half of them spelled his name wrong. 26 years. A jacket. Her voice was very tight. And I told myself when I built this place that I would never run a company that gave a man a jacket. I told myself that. And then yesterday morning I looked at you in your jacket and I looked right through you, same as they looked through him. She turned around and her eyes were wet and she didn't wipe them this time. You're offering me a chance to actually do the thing I've been telling myself I'd do for 6 years and never have. And you're offering it to me by turning down more money than most people see in a lifetime. I'm offering us a chance, Michael said. I can't build it without you. You can't build it without me. You've got the money and the name and the hangars. I've got the, I know these kids. I know what the door needs to look like from the outside because I stood outside it my whole life. 9:20. Sophia came back to the desk. But she didn't sit. She stood over the contract, the one with all the zeros, and she looked at it for a moment. Then she picked it up, and Michael thought for 1 second she was going to hand it to him again, press it on him, insist. Instead, she tore it in half. Michael's breath caught. That was the wrong contract, Sophia said. She dropped the 2 halves in the wastebasket. That was a contract for a man I hadn't finished understanding yet. Here's what we're going to do instead. Mr. Carter, and I'd like you to argue with me if you don't like it because I've spent 6 years surrounded by people who never argue with me, and look where it got me. She sat down, and now she was all business, and Michael realized this was Sophia Whitmore doing the thing she was actually best in the world at. The $1 million doesn't go to you, it goes into a foundation. Day 1. And Whitmore Aviation matches it. $2 million to start. And then, she was moving fast now the way Michael moved when he found the corrupted file, the momentum of someone who's found the real problem and can finally get to work. And then I take it to the board, and I don't ask them. I tell them that we're endowing this thing properly, because after the week we've just had, a story about Whitmore Aviation building free training for working-class kids is worth $10 million in goodwill, and every one of those cowards who called me at midnight about the stock will vote yes to save their own reputation. She almost smiled. I can be ruthless in a good cause, Mr. Carter. It's the only kind of ruthless I actually enjoy. 9:22. Michael stared at her. You're serious. I've never been more serious about anything in my life, she leaned forward. But I have conditions. Okay? 1. Your name is on it, not mine. The Carter program. Named for your father if you'll tell me his name. Michael's throat worked. Thomas. Thomas Carter. The Thomas Carter Aviation Institute. She wrote it down as she said it on a fresh sheet in a fast, slanting hand. 2. You run it, not as a figurehead. You run it. You design the curriculum, you pick the kids, you're in the shop with them. I'll handle the money and the politics and the parts of it that make you want to put your head through a wall, because those are the parts I'm good at, and they'd waste your gift. But the teaching is yours. The door is yours to build. I'm just paying for the lumber. Ms. Whitmore. 3. She held up a finger, and her voice changed, went quieter. You keep the notebook in the building. Not, I don't mean give it to me. I mean you keep it there where the kids can see it. Because a program that teaches technique is a trade school, and there are 100 of those. But a program that teaches kids that a man wrote down what he knew so it wouldn't die with him, that a mechanic's knowing was worth preserving. That's something else. That's the thing you're actually trying to build, isn't it? You're not trying to teach them to fix engines. You're trying to teach them that what they know matters. The notebook is the whole point. 924. Michael Carter looked at this woman he'd known for a little over 24 hours, and he understood that she'd seen straight through to the center of the thing, the same way he saw through to the center of a machine, and that he'd found of all the unlikely places in a corner office at the top of a company he'd walked into yesterday as a delivery man, someone who spoke his father's language without ever having met him. You'd really do this, he said. I'm already doing it. Try and stop me. She set down her pen. I told you there were things I wanted to talk to you about that shouldn't be said in front of 40 people. This was it. I didn't sleep last night either, Mr. Carter. I sat in this office until 4 in the morning, and I kept thinking about what you said in the hangar, about the guy in the truck knowing something. And I realized I built this entire empire to escape being the daughter of the guy in the truck. And in doing it, I became exactly the kind of person who looks through the guy in the truck. And I've been sick about it since 2 a.m. Her voice cracked just slightly. You gave me a way to fix it. So no, I'm not going to let you turn down that money and walk out of here with a handshake and a good feeling. I'm going to hold you to it. You said good people die invisible. Well, let's go make some of them visible. Starting with your father. 926. Michael couldn't speak for a moment. He looked down at the notebook on his knee. The soft cloth cover, the careful, cramped handwriting of a man who'd spent his life. Certain he didn't matter, and he thought about how he was going to tell Lily. And he thought about how he was going to explain to her that he'd turned down $1 million and gotten something bigger instead. And he thought that for once he had a story his daughter wouldn't have any trouble believing, because it was going to be standing right there in front of her with her father's name on the door. There's a fourth condition, Michael said. Sophia looked up wary. Is there? The first class. The very first group of kids. I get to pick them myself, and I don't pick them by grades or by tests or by any of the ways the world usually picks. He looked at her steadily. I pick them the way I fix machines. I find the ones everybody else looked right through. The ones who don't test well, don't interview well, don't shake your hand right, don't have the jacket. The ones who know something and haven't got a door. Those kids. First. Sophia Whitmore looked at him for a long moment. Then she extended her hand across the desk. Mr. Carter, she said. I think that's the best condition anyone's ever put to me. Deal. 928. They shook on it. And Michael Carter. Single father, radio shop mechanic. The guy nobody let in sat in a corner office at the top of Whitmore Aviation and felt the river of his life change direction for the second time in 2 days. Except this time, he understood exactly why. And this time, he'd been the one to reach in and change the flag from unsafe to safe. He drove home that afternoon with no check in his pocket, no $1 million in his account, and more than he'd ever had in his life. And when he came through the door at 4:30, Lily was at the kitchen table doing homework with her wire-strapped backpack hung over the chair, and she looked up at him, and she saw something in his face she'd never seen there before. Dad, she said, what happened? Did you get the reward? Michael set the notebook down on the kitchen table between them. He pulled out a chair, and he sat down across from his daughter in the small kitchen with the leaking faucet, and he said, "Baby, I gotta tell you something, and it's gonna sound crazy, and I need you to hear the whole thing before you decide if I did the right thing. You always tell me to hear the whole thing before I decide. I do, so hear it." Michael put his hand flat on the notebook. I turned down the money. Lily's face did about 4 things at once. "But," Michael said before she could get a word out, "I got something instead, and I need you to help me understand if it was worth it, because you're the smartest person I know, and you understood something last night I've been trying to understand my whole life." He took a breath. "So let me tell you what your grandpa's notebook just built." She decided it was worth it before he'd even finished explaining. "You put Grandpa's name on it," Lily said. Not a question. She'd caught the one detail that mattered to her out of everything he'd said the way she always did. "The building. It's gonna have Grandpa's name on it." "The Thomas Carter Aviation Institute." "Yeah." Lily was quiet for a second. Then she got up from her chair, walked around the table, and hugged her father around the neck so hard he felt her heartbeat against his shoulder, and she said into his ear in a small, fierce voice, "Then you did the right thing. You did the right thing, Dad. Grandpa gets to matter now. He gets to matter to everybody, not just us." And Michael Carter, who had held it together through the hangar and the office and the whole impossible day, finally lost it right there at his own kitchen table, with his arms around his 9-year-old daughter, and a leaking faucet dripping in the background, and his father's notebook sitting open between the salt and pepper shakers. He cried the way men cry when they've been holding something for years and are finally allowed to set it down. "Okay," he said, wiping his face, laughing at himself. "Okay, that's okay. You're crying. I'm aware." "Dad's crying," Lily announced to the empty kitchen, delighted, and Michael laughed and pulled her into his lap, even though she was getting too big for it, and for a little while the two of them just sat there. And it was, Michael thought, the richest he had ever felt in his entire life, and there wasn't a dollar in the room. The next 8 months moved faster than anything Michael had ever lived through. Sophia hadn't been exaggerating about being ruthless in a good cause. The board meeting she'd promised happened 4 days later, and Michael, who'd been invited to sit in, watched a room full of the same cowards who'd called her at midnight fall over themselves to vote. Yes, once they understood the story wasn't going to be Whitmore Aviation was sabotaged from the inside. The story was going to be Whitmore Aviation was saved by a working-class mechanic, and now they're building a free school in his father's name. One version was a scandal. The other was a legend. And every board member in that room understood the moment Sophia laid it out which one they wanted their name attached to. They voted yes, unanimous, and they didn't stop at 2 million. By the time the paperwork cleared, the Thomas Carter Aviation Institute was endowed at $11 million, with Whitmore's name behind it, and Michael Carter's name on the door as founding director. And the first thing Michael did with any of it, before the curriculum, before the hiring, before anything, was drive to his father's grave and sit down in the grass and tell the old man about it. "You always said the knowing was the thing," Michael told the headstone. "Not the titles, not the money. The knowing and passing it on so it doesn't die. Well, I found a way to pass it on, Dad. A big one. Bigger than the notebook." He ran his thumb over the engraved name. $11 million, and it's got your name on it, and there's going to be kids walking through a door with your name over it for the next 50 years. You did that. Everything you ever taught me, you did that. He sat there a long time, and when he got up, he felt lighter than he had in the 2 years since he'd buried him. The old shop. Carter Aviation Repair. The metal building he'd rented month to month from a landlord who kept threatening to charge more became the first campus. Sophia offered to build something new, something gleaming, and Michael said no. He wanted the kids in a real shop. He wanted the smell of it, the sound of it, the honesty of a place where things actually got fixed. So they bought the building outright gutted. It doubled it, filled it with equipment that Michael had only ever dreamed of touching, and left the front the same right down to the faded sign, because Michael wanted the first thing the kids saw to be a place that looked like somewhere they belonged. And then came the part that mattered most to him. Picking the first class. He did it exactly the way he'd told Sophia he would. He didn't look at grades. He didn't run interviews where kids in borrowed shirts tried to shake his hand the right way and say the right things. He went into the neighborhoods. He walked into the shops and the garages and the vocational classes that were getting their funding cut, and he looked for the ones everybody else looked through. The kid who was failing every class except the one where he got to take an engine apart. The girl who rebuilt her mother's transmission off videos on a cracked phone because they couldn't afford a mechanic. The quiet ones, the overlooked ones, the ones with grease under their fingernails and no door. He found 12 of them. The morning the first class walked through the door of the Thomas Carter Aviation Institute, under a sign with his father's name on it. Michael Carter stood at the front of the shop and looked at 12 kids that the whole world had already decided were nobody. And he understood he was looking at the reason he'd turned down $1 million, and he wouldn't have traded that morning for $10 million. He didn't give them a speech about hard work. He didn't give them a speech about opportunity. He walked to the front of the room and he set his father's notebook on a workbench where all of them could see it, and he opened it and he read them the line. "Before you replace the machine," Michael read, "understand why the machine is afraid to work." He closed it. My father wrote that. He fixed airplanes for 35 years, and he died thinking he didn't matter to anybody. He was wrong. He mattered to me, and now he's going to matter to you, because everything I'm about to teach you, he taught me first. He looked around the room. Here's the first thing you need to know, and it's the only thing I need you to believe on day one. Everybody in this room got looked through. Every single one of you. Somebody somewhere decided you were the kid with the toolbox, the one who didn't belong in the nice room. I know because I was you. I was you until I was 41 years old. He let that sit. This is the room where that stops. In here, what you know is worth something. In here, nobody gets looked through. You understand me? 12 kids stared at him. One of them, a skinny 15-year-old named Andre, who'd been kicked out of 2 schools and could strip and rebuild a small engine faster than men, twice his age, said in a voice that didn't quite believe it. "For real." "For real," Michael said. "Now grab a stool. We're going to start by learning how to listen." Sophia came to that first day. She stood at the back in a plain jacket, and she watched Michael teach 12 invisible kids how to hear what a machine was telling them. And Michael caught her eye once across the room and saw that she was crying quietly, the way she had in the hangar. And he understood that she wasn't just watching his father's dream come true. She was watching her own. She was watching the school that nobody had ever built for the guy in the truck. Afterward, when the kids had gone, the 2 of them stood in the empty shop. "My father would have loved this," Sophia said. "Mine too. Do you think they know, somehow?" She almost laughed at herself. "That's a stupid thing for a CEO to say." "It's not stupid," Michael said. "My dad used to say knowing doesn't die if you pass it on." He meant the knowledge. But I think he meant more than that. I think a person doesn't really die if you keep doing the thing they taught you. Every time one of those kids listens to a machine instead of just tearing it apart, my dad's in the room. Every time you build a door for somebody, the world looked through your dad's in the truck, and this time somebody's asking him what he knows. He looked at her. They know. However that works. They know. Sophia didn't say anything, but she reached over and squeezed his arm once, and that was enough. The years went the way good years do, quietly, and then all at once. The first class of 12 graduated. Then another. Then another. The institute grew. Kids who'd been kicked out of schools. Kids who'd been told they were nothing. Kids with grease under their fingernails and no door. They came through that building, hundreds of them, and they came out the other side as mechanics and technicians and engineers, and every one of them started the same way, sitting on a stool learning how to listen. Andre, the skinny 15-year-old who'd asked for real, became 7 years later the lead technician at one of the largest aviation companies in the country. The very kind of company that would once have looked straight through a kid like him. And on his first weeks on the job, Andre opened a training manual The institute had given every graduate a manual Michael had written himself, and inside the front cover, in Michael's own handwriting, was a note. The same note that was written in every single copy. The lesson Michael's father had pressed into his hands, that Michael had pressed into theirs. Always look deeper than the obvious problem. Andre read it. And then Andre, who had a toolbox of his own now, and a title, and a door that had been built for him by a man who'd refused $1 million, did something he would do for the rest of his career every time he trained someone new. He found the kid on his crew that everybody else looked through. The quiet one. The one who didn't test well, didn't interview well, didn't shake hands right. And he pulled up a stool next to that kid, and he said the only thing worth saying. "Everybody in this building got looked through once," Andre told him. "Somebody built me a door anyway. Now grab a stool. We're going to start by learning how to listen." Michael Carter never got rich. He never wanted to. He ran the Thomas Carter Aviation Institute for the rest of his working life, and he stayed in the same house with the faucet. He finally did fix, and he raised his daughter, and he watched her grow up in a world where her father's name meant something. Lily went to college, the first Carter ever to, and she studied engineering. And when people asked her why, she told them about the day her father came home and told her he'd turned down $1 million, and how she'd decided at 9 years old that he'd done the right thing, and how she'd spent every year since watching herself be proven right. And at Michael Carter's funeral many years later, the funeral home did not have 11 chairs filled. They had to move it to a hangar, because hundreds of people came, mechanics and engineers and technicians, whose lives had started on a stool in a shop with his father's name on the door, and their kids and the kids they'd trained, and the kids those kids had trained. Generations of people who'd been looked through and seen and taught to listen. They filled a hangar and they stood shoulder to shoulder, and when Andre Gray now himself got up to speak, he didn't talk about the jet. Everybody knew about the jet. That was the legend, the 4 minutes the $1 million turned down. He talked about the note in the front of the manual instead. He talked about the stool. He talked about the door. Michael Carter walked into a hangar one time as the man nobody would let in, Andre told the crowd, and he spent the rest of his life making sure the rest of us got let in. He used to say his father died thinking he didn't matter. Well, Andre's voice broke, and he let it. Look around this hangar. Look at all these people. This is what one invisible man's knowing turned into, because one time somebody finally listened. Nobody in this room is invisible, not one of us. And that's the whole thing he built. That's the whole thing his father built through him. He didn't fix a jet. He fixed the door. In the front row, Lily Carter held her grandfather's notebook against her chest. The soft cloth cover worn softer now by 2 generations of hands, and she thought about a small kitchen and a broken backpack strap and a father who could fix anything. And she knew now that he really could, because he'd fixed the biggest broken thing there was. He'd fixed the machine that kept good people invisible. He'd gotten down on its level, and he'd figured out what it was afraid of, and he'd told it the truth, and he'd changed the flag from unsafe to safe, and it had stayed changed for good for everybody who came after. The greatest discoveries are never made by the people with the biggest titles. They are made by the person nobody notices. The person carrying a toolbox. The person who keeps learning. The person who refuses to let knowledge disappear, and who, when the whole world looks straight through them, sits down at the machine and listens and fixes the one thing everyone else was too important to see. Michael Carter was that person. And in 4 minutes, he changed everything.